In the previous video, we talked about architecture and how present is still in our culture today. But we can see something quite similar about sculpture, because still the Greek sculpture established a standard that we can still see around in our cities and museums. So we have already mentioned too the importance that Greeks gave to the ideal of beauty related with proportion and harmony in the body. They were obsessed with youth, with being young, and 99% of their sculptures represent young men and women with perfect bodies. So they didn't try to be realistic in a way of showing the differences that we have, that some of us have bigger noses or, I don't know, like longer or shorter legs. They considered that there was a canon, that there was a perfection in beauty, and they tried to represent that. So that is why they created the canon, that actually the canon changed through time. At the beginning, it's like when they established this canon, they considered that the perfect body represented in a sculpture had to have 7 heads, yes? So the whole height of the body will take 7 heads. Later in time, they made it even more slender by saying that it had to have 8 heads. I just recommend you to try out and see. You can measure your head and then measure how many heads does your body have. In reality, it is quite rare that we are adapted or that we stick in this quite difficult canon. But it is completely true that when we look at a Greek sculpture, we can see that proportion and that beauty in the harmony between the different parts of the body. But obviously, Greek sculpture had an evolution. So the archaic period, the oldest period, is we can identify it because the sculptures remind us to the Egyptian sculptures. Yes, so the men and women are represented as a block with very little movement, and usually so completely standing and one foot in front of the other. Their faces are showing no emotions, a small smile like this, and their arms are on the sides of their bodies. Usually men are represented completely naked and are called kuroi, and women are represented with a dress like this, like a wrap dress, and are called korai. Yeah, usually they presented braided hair, el pelo como trenzado, and are very similar one to the other. Then in the classical period, Greeks learned to make very fair representations of that their ideal of beauty. So they were realistic, but in a very narrow way of what beauty is. Yes, their bodies were very proportionate. In the case of men, like athletical. In the case of women, very feminine, curvy. And they show some movement, but their faces were still like almost expressionless, very serene, yeah, like showing no emotion. And then in the last period, in the Hellenistic period, after the conquest of Alexander the Great and the expansion of the cultural of the Greek culture, we can see that their ideal of a sculpture changed, and we still start to see more movement in the sculptures, more complex sculptures, sometimes with 2 or 3 people, with animals, and a lot of movement and a lot of expression in their faces. Yes, so that is how we can identify Hellenistic or sculpture, a late Greek sculpture. We know that Greeks painted, but unluckily nothing has survived. The only type of painting that has survived is the painting in pottery. As you already know, Greeks were great painters, and luckily a lot of pottery vases and other recipients have survived. They started painting in black figures over a red or orange background, and then they learned to do the opposite and also add white. They were very expressive, and they liked to represent scenes of Greek mythology, but also about their daily life. So these objects and the paintings in these objects gives us a lot of information about their culture and beliefs. In the case of Romans, they adopted and copied, literally copied, many of the Greek sculptures. In many cases, they even brought them from Greece to the Roman villas or houses. But they also incorporated a tradition that they have inherited from the neighbors in the north, the Etruscans. That was the tradition of making realistic portraits. So far from the idealization of the Greeks that didn't even attempted to show the real face of people, Romans really liked to portray people as they were. So they took this tradition that I already mentioned when we talked about religion, of making masks of the dead and having them in the altars in their houses. So they took this tradition and made real portraits, of usually busts of their ancestors, and they had them in their houses. And later on also they made portraits, realistic portraits of important people, men, mainly men, and sometimes women. So we really know the face that Julius Caesar or Octavius Augustus or many other emperors or senators or important women had, because we see them represented in, we have recovered, we have found many of their portraits, and they looked similar, even like getting older. Yeah, so they were very good at it. And in this case, in the case of painting, they we have some of their paintings have survived. So although we haven't seen any of the Greek paintings, we have plenty of examples of Roman paintings. Most of them survived in the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, two cities in the south of Italy that were buried by the eruption of the Vesuvius volcano in the 1st century AD. So unluckily for those people, but luckily for us and archaeologists and historians, those cities have provided an incredible amount of information. But we have found hundreds of walls with paintings. So we know how good they were at painting, how realistic they were. They could represent very well people, animals, perspective, depth, detailing plants. So they were very good at it, and they really liked to decorate, to completely paint their walls, decorating them. And they also developed the use of mosaics to cover their floors. Yes, so they will take small pieces of stone of different colors and they will make drawings with it. Sometimes it would be something very similar, like simple, like a geometrical pattern on the edge or the perimeter of the room. And sometimes they will make amazing and very like complex works of art depicting mythological scenes or daily life scenes, or I don't know, like different types of animals of the region. So personally for me, yeah, this culture of the mosaics is one of the most beautiful things that we have inherited from Roman art. And every time that I see one of these mosaics, I can't stop marveling myself about how good they were at this. So we have already seen some of these mosaics in the isolation creations, but I suggest you to look on the internet and find out some more.